This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with Blake Crouch about Dark Matter. How are you, Blake?
I'm doing well this morning. How are you?
Good. I'm curious about the process of adapting your own work for a different medium. Is that something you would recommend to other writers?
Wow, that feels like a a loaded question. Um, I think it just depends. I don't know if a lot of novelists are necessarily built to wade into the waters of this kind of filmmaking. I think that it uses very different muscles than sitting in a room with your own thoughts, making up characters. It's such a collaborative experience. Um, but I also think that if you can figure that part of it out, it can be an incredible experience because you get to, once you have created this story on your own, you get to invite other people into the process. And a lot of times they just make it even better. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a big rough and tumble business. Would I recommend it? Probably not, but has a lot of fun perks.
Well, I know you've done it before, and I want to come back to your previous shows later, but starting with Dark Matter, I'm curious about just the roadmap for all of it because watching it as a viewer, it's very engaging, but also certainly confusing. And I'm curious how you keep things straight on set and just in your own notes for everything.
Yeah, it really starts with it is a potentially incredibly confusing story. And the first goal is to like figure out where are the moments that you want the audience to actually be confused and not understand what's happening. Because a certain level of confusion can be a good thing. It can make you lean in. But then there's the bad confusion that sort of makes you tune out. So we spend a lot of time trying to make sure we're on the walking in the light of the good confusion. Um, and we have a lot of really smart people working with us. I have an incredible script coordinator called Greg Nations, who just keeps like infinite documents of characters and worlds and what the people are wearing. It just kind of requires almost a having like we have something similar to like a Bible you'd have on a fantasy series that helps us keep track of everything.
On the note of really intelligent people, while obviously we don't know if such worlds like this exist in in our world, how scientific do you want to make sure to keep things like are there very set rules that you want to play by, or do you take certain liberties for the sake of the enjoyment experience?
I mean, we definitely take liberties where we feel it's still within the spirit of the science, but I have a scientific consultant on our team named Dr. Clifford Johnson, who also consulted with me on the book. And he reads every script and bounce ideas off of him all the time. And our sort of methodology is we want it to be based in real science. And a lot of the way the sort of theories behind the box are based on things that have happened in our world. Like in 2010, a physicist made these little machined wafers vibrate at different frequencies at the same time inside a clean room where all the air had been removed, the temperature turned down to you know, near absolute zero and no light allowed in. And I mean, he literally created a very different kind of version of what we're talking about, which is different realities. And although those manifested in something that's super in the weeds and sciencey, if you start thinking about scaling silicon wafers vibrating at different frequencies at the same time to human beings being alive and at the same time different versions of yourselves, yeah, it's a huge leap. But the same concepts that led to that very real discovery, we steal from for our show.
I think it's also an interesting idea of like all science fiction is just science, but maybe in the future when we get there,
That's
as
right.
we come to understand more things. So
That's
even
right.
though like, Back to the Future, we don't have the hoverboard the way we thought we'd have, certain things sometimes turn out a little bit differently, but it's all the same idea.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I want to get a little more into the weeds of the show itself. So I'm hoping that those who are watching at this point, this interview, have finished the first season. But I think there's towards the end, we sort of get a convergence where all of a sudden it goes from this, we've been following these two characters to it is infinitely bigger than we ever might have thought, or that maybe those who were paying closest attention or who understand the science say, of course it could get this big. That said, like a sort of jarring shift, which I think was meant to shock audiences a little bit. Can you talk about that decision to have that there?
Sure. I mean, it really goes back to when I was writing the book, and thinking about like what would a good like third act for this story be. And at the time, I had assumed that Jason would come home, make it back to his home world, find that this imposter is living with his family, and it would sort of be this mano a mano battle royale between the two of them. Um, and it seemed like a good strategy, when I was starting out with the book and for a while as I was writing it. But when I got to the end and was ready to write that stuff, it just felt unsatisfying to me, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks and stopped progress on the book for a number of months. And then I had gone back through all of my journals because I take a lot of notes before I start writing. And one of the things I had written was, what if Jason gets home and finds that instead of just him getting home, a bunch of other versions of him, not Jason 2, also made it home. And like, it's this crazy thing. And at the time I'd written, no, that won't work. That's too crazy and out there. But when I had written a lot of the book, and I realized that was actually like a really cool twist that was also inevitable because it sort of paid homage to the rules that we had established. And I always like in my stories for things, especially in the third act, to just sort of explode out and to, I'm always trying to wring out as much as I possibly can from the concept.
Well, it is the third act, but also there's a second season coming. I assume there might be more after that. Do you have a roadmap for how much story you want to tell? Do you know where it's going? Or are you ready to sort of see where it takes you based on the book, etc.?
Well, we're beyond the book. The book was completely cannibalized for season one, so we are totally off book now and deep into the weeds of prep for season two.
Does that make you nervous at all, the idea that you're past the book, or is it an exciting new adventure?
It's a really exciting new adventure. It's annoying not to have the book, and it reminds me why I don't think I would ever just write like an original screenplay. I love the process of figuring out what the story is in a book and with prose where it's just you and not a bunch of voices. I think that's how you get to really like protect the story and then bring other people in once it's really baked. So this is a little bit different, but again, we know what the characters are, we know what the world is, so it isn't like a totally brand new thing that's just being explored in the screenplay form for the first time.
How much do you pay attention to fan reactions to the show? And do you feel like if you do, that the fans are mostly, science devotees or people who just like watching TV?
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, I can't. I absolutely kind of try to have a sense of how people are receiving it. Um, Not that I would say it overly affects what the story is, but I would say it is more like heartening when I see what I perceive that people want and really respond to in the show, and when I see that that lines up very closely with what we're doing in season two and beyond, that gives me a lot of confidence.
Going back to some of your previous works, I remember watching Wayward Pines when it was on, and that was one which had a pretty major twist early on that changed the
Mhm.
entire concept of the show. Is there a major difference between working in this case with like a streaming network versus broadcast back then?
For sure. I think we have far more creative freedom. Um, I think that when you're writing and making something for what was then like network, and even network television is different now. And I think it's all sort of merging into the same sort of thing. But then it was a lot more down the middle. It was a lot more kind of having to, I'm just to say it kind of, you feel like you're sort of being asked to sort of write towards the lowest common denominator instead of assuming that the people who are watching your show are really smart. Um, and that's a really lovely thing to be able to make something and just assume that people watching it are really smart.
Well, the other show that you worked on is one that I think I see a lot of links between Wayward Pines and Dark Matter. genre wise and themes, etc. Good Behavior to me is something so completely different. It's a show that I loved that I feel like
Oh,
I
thank
don't
you.
talk about enough, but I still talk about it. I imagine more than most, just because it's so singular and interesting. I especially think about that episode at the hotel with Ann Dowd. That was just so unforgettable. I don't have a great question about that show other than like where did that come from? Because it really doesn't
Yeah.
align with some of the other projects here.
Yeah, no, totally. That like that show, I have like two things that like that show and this movie that just finished filming based on a book of mine called Famous that are really outside of like they're not sci-fi speculative at all. Um, that came from, I always think of my stories as like concept based. And I think good behavior is also concept based. It's just that the concept is instead of this like a box or this town that you can't leave, the concept is the character of Letty. She was such a strong, immediate creative moment when like she kind of came into my life and many years ago, and I started writing her, and I've really, with one other exception, had an experience. I've never had experience where the character just like kind of takes over and like just leads you through the story. Usually, I am desperately trying to figure out who the characters are and pull them through the story, and that was such a joy, and it was so easy and beautiful to write her, and her voice was just so clear to me. That even though it wasn't a sci-fi thing or a high concept by any stretch. I think it actually weirdly does fit in with the rest of my work because the concept is this, super flawed, interesting character. I love that show. It's weird. I mean, people who love that show love that show. It's almost gotten this weird, like mini little cult following since in the wake of its release.
I also love for anybody who watches Downton Abbey to watch that. They're like, well, Mary's a little edgy and has some
Yeah,
attitude. I'm like, wait till you see this show.
yeah.
This is a perfect role for Michelle
It was. And
Dockery.
Juan Diego Bato, it's just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal in that.
What can you share about the process of making Famous?
Um, I wasn't super involved in it. It was a book I wrote in 2002. Um, and then I'd never been to New York or Los Angeles, and it's set in those two cities. I'd never been, and I had written this book many years ago, and just set it aside because I thought it was an odd little thing. And I kept coming back to it and revising it. And I finally like released it when I was doing some self-publishing around 2010. But it was never a big thing for me. And over COVID, my friend Chad Hodge, who also created Good Behavior with me and wrote and created Wayward Pines, he reached out. I was like, "Do you have anything else?" And I really I didn't. And I started thinking, I was like, I just wonder if he would respond to Famous. So I said, I might have this one thing, and I sent it to him, and he like flipped out about it because it's a little bit like Good Behavior, and that is very super character based. And we had actually written, if you look at the pilot episode of Good Behavior, when Letty and Javier are sitting at dinner talk, and she's kind of bullshitting with him about her job, and she's writing this book. The book that she pitches to him is the premise of Famous. So Chad ended up writing an incredible script, and then we went to Sam Esmail's company, and they came on as producing partners, and then suddenly we got this incredible director in Jody Hill and Zac Efron, and then they built the rest of the cast out, and we got to shoot it all in Los Angeles over 28 days starting in November, and they just wrapped up last week.
Well, it sounds like that'll be great for the cult fans of Good Behavior. A little Easter egg that you planted in there.
Exactly. I don't know when it's coming out. It's still early, but it'll be at 8/24.
Amazing. Well, I'm curious. I was like, whoever I'm talking to, this is Awards Buzz. What are you watching? What shows have really stuck with you as particularly memorable and impressive?
Oh wow. So far this year, I think a lot of good stuff came out this year. Love Day of the Jackal. Really, I mean, I think we're like this espionage resurgence. Love that. Love The Diplomat. We just started watching Black Doves, which is such a blast. My kids and I, we love From. you know, the Lost guys. Not sure if they've got it. I don't know. I don't know if they know. I thought they knew. I thought I knew what was happening after the end of season two and where they left that. Now I'm not so sure, but we'll see.
Well, like it's such a pleasure to speak with you. Looking forward to seeing more of Dark Matter and this film and plenty more in the future.
Thanks, Abe. Great to speak with you.